Why am I depressed? This is a question I've asked myself many times over the years. And I think a lot of the reasons behind my depression are very unclear, very hard to isolate. I don't know why some days I wake up and it's very hard for me to get out of bed. I don't know why other days it's fine and I'm able to do things and I feel driven. But one thing that I have noticed is that a lot about the culture in the West surrounding productivity, outcomes, drive, motivation, and this kind of thing, that a lot about this culture is extremely suffocating and has personally felt very alienating. So let me go into this a little bit. So I was raised in a migrant family. My family always valued drive and ambition, and naturally I absorbed this and embodied it, and I think I'm a pretty driven and ambitious person. I have a very hard time not doing things. And so a lot of my sense of self is orientated around my capacity to produce. And so being depressed is like the kryptonite of productivity, of being able to produce. And so when I am depressed, I find it very hard to be in touch with my reasons for doing things. I find it very hard to put myself in the work that I make. And this is a very upsetting thing because a lot of my identity is tied up with what I make. I draw a lot of meaning from the things that I make. And what I've realized is that so much of my identity is tied up with what I produce that I don't think I have a very good sense of who I actually am outside of my projects. And I don't think this is something that we're taught to do in the West. I think that we have this, in fact, I think we're taught to do the opposite thing. We're taught to alienate ourselves and focus on what we're able to make, and associate who we are with what we're able to make, rather than treating the self as something that is independent from, any kind of product or any kind of outcome or any kind of thing that we are making. And this is quite alarming because presumably it's going to be very important for people to know who they are. But think about how many times you've come to the end of an exam period, or you've reached some deadline or something, submitted a big assignment at work or at university or whatever, and then you've just felt hollow and empty afterwards. And I think one explanation for this is that we don't know how to spend time that isn't kind of hyper-driven and hyper-organized and directed towards some particular outcome. We don't know how to be still. We don't know how to be free from distraction. And we go out of our way to avoid distraction. We have social media, we have music, we have all kinds of things that take us out of our bodies. It's very hard to establish a relationship with any of these things in such a way that it brings us back into our bodies and back into who we actually are. And I think this is a huge contributor to my depression because when I start thinking about this, when I start realizing that for months I have been working hard on various different projects and not kind of examining who I actually am, but that whole time I've been conflating who I am with the work that I'm making, I begin to get quite distressed, and I begin to think that I have lost myself. I have forgotten that I'm actually this thing that is alive. I guess I've lost my sense of self in my work or in my drive or in my ambition. It's almost as if, the more driven I am, the less depressed I am, and the less connection I have with myself. And then when I'm depressed, things slow down, and all of this introspection happens, and I realize that I don't actually know who I am. That all that I am, it feels, is just the things that I make, the work that I do. And obviously work is very important. I'm not saying that, I'm not saying that we shouldn't produce things or we shouldn't do things that feel meaningful for us. But what I'm saying is that I think that a lot of the kind of crises that I have, the mental crises, come from an inability to separate myself from the things that I make. Maybe I'm just making a big mistake here. Maybe it's not actually possible to separate yourself from the things that you make. And maybe I should just accept that this is what I am. That a lot of my identity is in fact contained in producing and making. But, I've studied philosophy for a number of years, and there's a lot of philosophers who entertain this idea of a self that exists independent of commitments to making things or commitments to a university or commitments to a job. When we have time away from these commitments, when we aren't making things, I feel like most of us fall apart. It's almost like I freak out. I ask myself who I am. I try and spend time that isn't just, me distracting myself constantly from myself by going on social media or watching movies or reading or whatever. And whenever I try and be still, I realize that there isn't much there. It feels like there isn't a remotely coherent sense of self that exists outside of projects and meaning. And it feels like the 25 years that I've been on this planet, every single year, I've been bombarded with the same message. Make things, make more, work more, be more productive. And I've never been shown very clearly how to get in touch with who I actually am, how to use still moments, how to enjoy not working. This is something that I'm beginning to notice about my depression, that a lot of my sense of self is connected with my work, and when I'm unable to work for whatever reason, maybe because I'm depressed, I begin to feel as though I don't know who I am. And this makes me even more depressed. There's this funny kind of cycle. And one thing that I've done to try and answer the question of who I am is, go on the internet or read self-help books and listen to people who talk about how to do more, how to kind of get more in touch with yourself and this kind of thing, how to find meaning in life. And I think that the vast majority of these people, especially people who talk about productivity on YouTube, they have no regard for one's sense of self. All they have regard for is outcome. And often all they have regard for is money. And I think that unfortunately, today's culture around self-help and around being more productive and being more useful, where we're being pushed is further away from the self and towards identifying the self with work, with the product, with the outcome. And so, the theory is you should become more validated, you should become more satisfied the more you're able to make. And I guess I want to challenge this theory. I don't think that it's right for us to always have to rely on what we're able to make in order to feel satisfied, in order to feel validated. I think that in fact what we should be encouraged to do is learn how to appreciate the still moments, the moments where we're not being hyper-productive, because my theory is that this is where the self lies. This is where we're going to discover what's actually meaningful for us. Because think about some very kind of pivotal moments in your life. Some pivotal moments for me are when I'm listening to music, or when I'm watching a movie, or when I'm walking with a friend or talking to someone, and I realize what's important for me. I realize that something that I really care about is, spending quality time with friends, or, kind of relaxing and listening to music. And I'm only reminded of these once every 6 months. And then in between these kind of 6-month intervals, I forget and I just focus on work. And then every 6 months, I'm reminded of what is beautiful for me and what I care about. And then instantly I forget about these things. I forget about what I actually care about, or what is kind of speaking to this self that I have, and I return to work. And so this is a challenge that I'm trying to wrap my head around at the moment. It feels like a very complex one. I don't think the answer is to work more, or to read more self-help books, or to watch more productivity tips on YouTube, because I think that inevitably the outcome of these is that you're going to be pushed further away from yourself and towards identifying with products and with outcome. And I don't necessarily think that's right, because I think that there is a self inside you that can be identified with. And I think that self is always going to be more important than what you're able to produce. So there's my kind of cognitive challenge of the day. This is what I've been thinking about recently. Thanks for listening if you're listening. Thanks for watching if you're watching. And always, you can get in touch with me on social media at Aleks Listens on Instagram, or on TikTok or something like that at Aleks Listens. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting it via Patreon. There'll be a link in the bio, or by PayPal. There's also a link in the bio. Have a nice day. Take care.